Hi, and welcome to another episode of Book Chats. My name is Malea, and I am going to let you know what I read recently. Of the books that we'll be discussing today, I have them listed on my computer down below here, so if you see me looking down, that is why. Of these books, I read 2 in physical form, the rest I read as ebooks, but the 2 that I read in physical form I've already had to return to my library, so I will be popping up images of the books all right here. These are loosely in the order that I enjoyed them, and let's get into it. And if you hear any noises or whatnot, or if my camera suddenly wobbles like that, I apologize. I am sitting on my bed and my dog is on the bed next to me. We live in a busy downtown area, and I do have a patio off to the side just over there, so you may hear some ambient noise, as well as 2 other adults living in my home who also happen to be home today. So anyway, let's get to the books. So the first, these are roughly in order from the ones I least enjoyed to the most enjoyed. There's a little bit of wiggle room in there, and probably what I enjoyed would change day to day if you asked. So the first book was Dinner Party by Sarah Gilmartin. This is an Irish novel. It takes place across several years, and it goes back and forth a little bit in ways that are a little bit disorienting, but our main character is also not really a reliable narrator, so I feel like that kind of goes hand in hand with our main character. This is about a family who suffered tons of tragedy. Our main character was a twin. Her twin sister died. You find that out very early in the novel, so I'm not giving anything away. Just a heads up, there is quite a bit about an eating disorder that our main character deals with, as well as physical and emotional abuse from the mother to the family. So be aware of that if that's sensitive for you. I really wanted to love this novel, but the character I liked the most got the least coverage in the book, I feel like. And that was an older brother. The rest of the characters were all kind of terrible. Somehow I read a lot of books with terrible characters and a lot of books that are pretty sad and depressing. There's a lot of loss that goes on throughout this novel. Ultimately, it's called Dinner Party because the novel centers on some siblings having a dinner party. The twin who is survived is hosting this dinner party for her brothers and one of the brothers' spouses. There's some family interplay happening at this dinner, but it also brings up a lot of memories, a lot of very difficult memories, and they go through some of that throughout this dinner party, and you go back in time to see what caused some of the trauma and some of the problems that our main character has, where her eating disorders really originated, the trauma of her sister dying, and her witnessing her sister dying, and then trying to go to university the next year, how that didn't really go the way that she planned it to, and how she ended up with alcohol abuse issues, and needed treatment for her eating disorder, and so on. Ultimately, the end was pretty good. I did enjoy the end. There is some redemption for our main character and her brothers. But I really struggled with this one, I think because it was a bit disorienting and I had trouble keeping track of the timeline a little bit more than I usually would. Our next book is A Deadly Inheritance by Kelley Armstrong. This gave Gossip Girl vibes. A lot of, late teen, ultra elite, super wealthy kids competing against one another. Our main character is really like a nobody, and her father dies and then her mother dies, and she's trying to live in this apartment alone until she can graduate high school and go on to college, where she's done very well in school, so she has a full ride to college, and then she gets a knock on the door, and it's DHS basically wanting to put her in foster care. And at the same time, this mysterious lawyer also shows up at the apartment and says, guess what? You're actually wealthy. Your grandparents have this huge amount of money just sitting here waiting for you. You're going to get a trust when you turn this certain age. They want you to go to this elite boarding school. and yada yada, but you won't have to go to foster care if we do this. So she goes with this attorney, ends up at this extremely exclusive boarding school. I believe it's called Westlake. It's in the southern states of the United States, although they don't really get deep into this boarding school being in the south versus a lot of boarding schools that are, in the northeast or in, the Los Angeles, Southern California area. There's a little bit about that, but not a ton of history or anything like that. There's a lot of secrets. Every character has a secret. The students at this boarding school are competing for this position. I think it's called Optima, and there's our main character and a couple of the friends that she makes uncover this pattern of these deaths that are related to this Optima thing. It's a lot of not knowing who you can trust. Can you actually trust the people you consider your friends? Can she trust this lawyer? Can she trust anyone? And did she make the right choice by going to this boarding school versus going to foster care? It was an okay book. It definitely, made time go by when I was kind of floundering for something to read. I would say it was worth reading if you like teenage drama and backstabbing and finding out all the horrible secrets of the ultra elite, wealthy, and competition and power struggles. Not my normal reading, but I just needed something that was available from the library when I couldn't sleep in the middle of the night one night, and that's what I came up with. Next was Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by Dave Stewart. He was one half of the band The Eurythmics. This is his memoir about his life, his musical career. A really good friend and I are taking a trip this summer to the UK, and the whole trip is revolving around The Eurythmics and Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart, and so I thought it would be fun to read his memoir. I love this book because it gave a lot of history of the Eurythmics and Dave and Annie Lennox's styles as musicians, how they met, a lot of background, but it did end up turning into sort of this happened, then this happened, and then that happened, and it was not really a narrative. It was more a list of things that happened, but I did still find it enjoyable. I did still give me an appreciation for their music, and I learned a lot about a lot of their songs that I didn't really know about, the hit backstory to a lot of their songs. There's a pretty funny anecdote about Aretha Franklin in the book, and a lot about troubles that Dave Stewart would get into with Mick Jagger and so on. If you enjoy memoirs and you enjoy music, that might be a good one to read. If you don't care about memoirs and you don't care about music, maybe skip it. Next was a piece of fiction called A Town with Half the Lights On by Paige Getz. This was another one that I pulled from the library in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. I did enjoy it. I liked it more than the other one, than The Deadly Inheritance. It was a little more my interest and speed. We have a family who moves from Brooklyn, New York to a tiny town called Goodnight, Kansas. Their lives are completely upended. The father is basically a failed chef. He really disappointed his whole family, and his wife has this inheritance of this home and property in Kansas. So they move out there with their teenage daughter. The teenager ends up, meeting a best friend. They both are really outcasts at school, and they both together uncover a lot of secrets of the family and this sort of evil corporation called Goodnight Tire Company, I think, that really supports the entire town, but it's run by a guy who is just greedy. He's constantly raising rents on people, but he's a slumlord, so the people whose rents he's raising, he never does repairs except for the bare minimum. Ultimately, a lot of people in the town get laid off and they have nowhere to go. They don't have jobs. Our failed chef takes over a diner in the town, and he's like, this isn't going to work, or we're just going to save enough money to get back, get out and go back to New York. They end up finding creative ways to employ a lot of the people in town, which rubs some people the wrong way. It rubs a lot of the people in power the wrong way, especially at the tire company. There's a lot of push and pull between, the mayor and the city council versus the family versus the tire company. This was a cute story. It was, I wouldn't say it's a feel-good story, but it's a story that I think a lot of people can relate to in terms of layoffs, not being able to afford to live in your community, trying to find community, found family, a lot of things like that. I would have liked to have seen the mother's character developed a bit more, but overall I really enjoyed this one and I would suggest reading it. I thought it was pretty good. Next we come to this. I would say this is tied in terms of my enjoyment. The next book is A Bow Forged from Ash by Melissa Powless Day. This is a book collection of poetry, so if you don't like poetry, skip it. If you do like poetry, dive into it. This is about Indigenous identity, Indigenous history, ancestral memory. It's written in English with quite a lot of Indigenous language. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Anishinaabe language. The bow is carried throughout the novel as a metaphor for resilience, strength, persistence, and so on. I liked this novel, or this collection of poetry, quite a bit, and it definitely would look for more by this poet. Our next book is nonfiction. This one is part memoir, part communication guide. It's Life on the Bridge, Linking My World to Yours as an Autistic Therapist by Kaelynn Partlow. You may have seen Kaelynn Partlow on, I think, what is the name of it? It was a reality show about autistic people trying to find dates. I don't recall the name of it. I will link it in the description box though. She is a behavioral therapist, or an autistic behavioral therapist, but she also is autistic herself. She talks quite a bit about the struggles that she had growing up autistic while being highly verbal, which a lot of people, at least until recently, didn't really consider common among, or to be part of autism. But she had all sorts of other aspects of being autistic that made life very difficult growing up, and she goes well into that. And she talks about communication, all levels of communication. She talks about ways to communicate with somebody who really struggles with communication, who has no verbal communication or very limited verbal communication. She talks about communicating with behaviors and really breaking down communication. Although this is focused on autism, I think her tips can apply to almost anyone. They are things that I use regularly in my private tutoring with my students, even if they don't have autism. They are things I've used in the classroom teaching. I love this book. I learned some new things. She reinforced a lot of the things I already do with my students. Ultimately, it comes down to every single person is different, and you have to figure out what works for that individual person, whether they're autistic or not. I love this book. I definitely will read it again. I liked it enough that I probably will buy a copy to be able to delve back into regularly. That Life on the Bridge, as well as the rest of the books I'm going to talk about, I think these are all top tier. The next one, They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, Stephen Scott, and Justin Eisinger. I read this. It's a graphic novel. My only complaint about this one is that the print was tiny. My library, at least not that I saw, I didn't see any larger print. The print was tiny. I'm wearing glasses, as you can see. I'm very, very farsighted. I found that in order to comfortably read this, I had to be in really bright light. I couldn't read it in low light. I couldn't read it with just a lamp to my side. I had to have very bright overhead light, which I don't really like. But overall, it was an excellent book. It gives a lot of history about internment camps of the Japanese during World War II, about how that happened, about the repercussions of it, both in the moment and long-term through today. I think if you were to read that, you would see quite a bit of parallels with some of the things happening in the United States over the last few years, which is heartbreaking and incredibly sad. But it was exceptional. You absolutely should read it. They Called Us Enemy by George Takei. It was fantastic. Next is Stream by Aida Salazar. This is written, it looks like poetry, but it's written more as like texts and by like the way you might write to somebody online. It's about two teenagers who, they're from Oakland, California. One of them is kind of getting into trouble for some of her online activity with social media. The other one is kind of getting into trouble because he's just becoming obsessed or really addicted to video gaming and how it's impacting their lives. And while they're both at a party, another student disappears. And these are young teens. They're not older teens. These are younger teens. The student who disappears does get found safe and sound, but he was catfished. And so the parents of the other two teens of our protagonists, they both are like, you know what? No, we're not doing this summer. You are going to stay to family in Mexico, in rural Mexico, and you are going to spend the summer there helping your family members with different things, and you're not going to have access to the internet or cell phones. And the kids, of course, are flipping out. They're like, what are you talking about? I need my phone. I need the internet. And, you know, throughout quite a bit of the book, these two kids are like, how can I get a phone? How can I get online? How can I check my Instagram? How can I play a video game? The girl ends up going to stay with her aunts who have a clinic, a medical clinic on this ranchero or arroyo, I guess. And then the boy goes to stay with his friend's family, where he and his friend are helping to rebuild a stream bed and to protect the ranchero or the arroyo from flooding. You know, there are of course some tense moments with a flood, with one of the boys getting hurt, with a love interest that the girl develops, a crush that one of the boys develops, and so on. Ultimately, they do find a way to get online. It ends up being a pretty big negative incident, but they do recover from it. I actually loved this book. I think it's great. It's really meant for young adults. But as an adult myself, I enjoyed it. I would really strongly suggest this one. Stream by Aida Salazar. Next was Playing Atari with Saddam Hussein by Ali Fadhil and Jennifer Roy. I love this book. This one is super short. You could easily read it in a day. It takes place in Iraq during the Gulf War, very close to Kuwait. It's from the perspective of a preteen boy who loves Atari. He loves his video games, but he also loves soccer. And basically, the Gulf War starts, the family loses power, and he can't play his Atari anymore. He talks about, this is nonfiction. This is basically a memoir. He talks about the difference between the way Saddam Hussein presented what was happening versus the way other countries were presenting what was happening, and that having batteries to be able to listen to the radio and get an outside perspective was really important. His dad, I believe, was a dentist, and when the Gulf War broke out, he got sent to be a medic in the field. So the dad often was gone for quite a long time, and they never really knew if dad was going to come back or not. At one point, they are uncertain if dad is even alive. The boy and his siblings and their mother are kind of trapped in, not trapped, but they are staying very close to home. They're very concerned about food, fuel, cooking, you know, what are they going to cook with? There are a couple of scenes where where Ali he's just like, I am so tired of eating the same things over and over and over, but it's what they have to do. The mom is a very strong mother. She's doing her best to keep her family together amid really difficult circumstances. I love this one. It's another one that I definitely would read again. And several years ago, I taught a homeschool unit study to a tutoring student on revolutions around the world, and if I were to do that again, this is probably a book that I might include, even though it's not necessarily a revolution, but I think it's close enough. This book and the George Takei memoir graphic novel, I think they complement each other really well. And then last is my favorite book of all of the ones that I've talked about so far, and I had no idea, but one of my absolute favorite movies was based on this book. I had no clue that movie actually was a book first. It's called The Wife by Meg Wolitzer. The movie stars Glenn Close and Jonathan Pryce. They are exceptional. They are so good. And now that I've read the novel, I want to go back and watch the movie another time. This is a book about a wife supporting her husband when often she shouldn't. It's about her husband taking the glory for her work. It is about a wife who feels very stuck in a lot of ways. She looks like she's got the ideal perfect life. She's got a husband, she's got adult children that have been raised to adulthood. Her husband is a successful writer. They have a beautiful home. They have everything they could possibly need, and now her husband has won this amazing prize, and they are being flown to Helsinki, Finland, to receive this prize. In the book, it's not the Nobel Prize, it's like a step down, but still extremely prestigious. The book really starts as her narrative of going to Helsinki with her husband, but throughout this process of the trip, she delves back into her history, into her memories of her life with her husband and her regrets. Very, very early in the book, you find out that she plans to leave him as soon as he has received this prize. Once he's got the prize in their home, she's like, bye, I'm out. I'm done with this. I'm done with the dysfunction of our relationship. I'm done with being the dutiful wife and not having what my right do. This is a book about secrets, about making choices, about people having affairs. Really, secrets are the core of this book. I loved it. It is dark, it is depressing, but that is sort of what I enjoy reading the most. So those are the books that I read recently since my last video. I enjoyed them all, but definitely the last few that I talked about I enjoyed more than the others. And please let me know what you're reading. I'm having hip surgery in September and I'll be laid up in bed for a while, so I would love some recommendations for things that I might find at my local library. Until the next video, thanks for listening. Bye!